Look at any major city in Europe, Australia, or South America right now. You will see a new king taking over the roads. Sleek, affordable, futuristic electric vehicles bearing 3 letters. BYD. The business world is calling them the next Toyota. Harvard case studies praise their vertical integration. Wall Street marvels at its record-breaking profit margins. But if you travel 5,000 miles away to the outskirts of Hangzhou or Guangzhou, you will find a very different reality. You will find massive, overgrown fields filled with thousands of brand new, unregistered BYD cars. They are left there to quietly rot in the sun. This is the greatest corporate illusion of our time. How did a single company convince the smartest investors on the planet that they were a capitalist miracle, while secretly running one of the most sophisticated financial shell games in modern history? We are going to tear down the facade. We will look at the phantom sales, the hidden debt, and the staggering government machine keeping it all afloat. The world is being played. The story of BYD went global around 2020, and it needed a protagonist. It found one in Wang Chuanfu, a chemist-turned-billionaire from rural Anhui province who had started a company in a rented warehouse and grown it into a global manufacturing giant. The financial press loved him. Warren Buffett had held BYD shares since 2008, and in the world of investor signaling, that single fact carried enormous weight. If Buffett owns it, the thinking went, it must be real. Harvard Business School published case studies praising the genius of BYD's vertical integration model. Goldman Sachs analysts described the stock as a generational opportunity. The BBC ran feature profiles presenting Wang Chuanfu as a reluctant visionary who had simply outthought the competition. Forbes listed him among the world's wealthiest people and framed the wealth as earned through pure engineering brilliance. None of those institutions was lying on purpose. That is what makes this so dangerous. They were reading from a script that BYD had spent 20 years writing for them, a script with one central argument: this was an organic miracle, a company that had risen from a battery workshop to a global automotive force through discipline, scale, and ingenuity, a David who had beaten Goliath by being smarter. By 2022, BYD overtook Tesla to become the world's largest seller of new energy vehicles. The financial world erupted in applause. The underdog narrative was complete, and at that exact moment, while analysts were updating their price targets, something else was happening inside the company, something that none of those reports mentioned. The price of winning was not what it appeared. Consider one number. In early 2025, BYD cut the starting price of its cheapest model, the Seagull, to 55,800 yuan. That is roughly 5,800 British pounds for a full electric vehicle, complete with a screen, software, a warranty, and a battery built from some of the most expensive raw materials on the planet. No Western automaker can reach that number. Not Stellantis, not Volkswagen, not Ford. The average cost to manufacture a competitive electric car in Europe or America sits somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000 before you add logistics, dealer margin, or profit. BYD is selling finished, globally shipped cars at prices that make those manufacturers look like they are operating in a different universe. The mainstream explanation is vertical integration. BYD manufactures its own batteries, cutting out the middleman, and yes, that helps, but it does not explain a gap this extreme. When analysts model the battery cost advantage honestly, the numbers still don't add up. You're left staring at a price point that pure engineering cannot justify. Here is what makes the math even harder to ignore. By 2024, only 3 Chinese automakers were operating in the black. The average profit per electric vehicle across the entire Chinese market had collapsed to around 2,000 yuan per unit. At those margins, a sustained global pricing war should be financially fatal for any company running it. And yet BYD keeps cutting prices. So the question is not how they are winning. The question is who is covering the bill. If this is landing differently than you expected, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. What comes next makes the pricing story look almost reasonable. Between 2018 and 2022, China's government transferred at least $3.7 billion directly into BYD's accounts, according to research published by Germany's Kiel Institute for the World Economy. That support jumped from around $220 million in 2020 to $2.1 billion in 2022 alone. And that is only the direct payment figure. It does not count discounted or free land provided for factory construction. It does not count preferential access to raw materials. It does not count the government procurement policy that steered public sector vehicle purchases toward BYD and away from foreign competitors. It does not count the purchase tax exemptions worth up to 30,000 yuan per vehicle per buyer, which made BYD products artificially cheaper at the point of sale. Most recently, in 2025, BYD received 12.47 billion yuan in government subsidies related to its daily operations. That figure represented 31.4% of its total pre-tax profit. Strip those subsidies out entirely, and BYD's adjusted net profit would fall by roughly 50% from the prior year. The company that the global press celebrates as a capitalist miracle is, in financial reality, a state project wearing a corporate suit. Its pricing strategy is not a competitive advantage. It is a transfer of public money into the private market destruction. And here is the detail that rarely makes the headline. The Kiel Institute found that over 99% of listed Chinese companies received direct government subsidies in 2022. This is not exceptional. It is the infrastructure of the entire system. What makes BYD different is not that it receives state support. It is what that support has been used to build, not a better product, a better illusion. And the illusion only holds as long as nobody looks at the balance sheet. In January 2025, an accounting firm called GMT Research published a report that should have stopped the market cold. GMT had previously issued warnings about China Evergrande Group before its catastrophic collapse. Now they were looking at BYD, and what they found was a number that the company's own filings had kept almost entirely out of sight. BYD's official financial statements listed net debt of 27.7 billion yuan as of mid-2024. GMT's analysis, working from the same publicly available figures, put the actual number closer to 323 billion yuan, a discrepancy arising from the company's practice of removing receivables from its balance sheet and treating long-delayed supplier payments as working capital rather than liability. BYD runs a promissory note platform called Dialink, through which it pays suppliers not in cash, but in notes redeemable at a later date. By May 2023, the platform had issued approximately 400 billion yuan worth of these notes. In 2023, BYD took an average of 275 days to pay its suppliers, compared to a global industry norm of between 45 and 60 days. That gap is not operational efficiency. That is a shadow banking structure buried inside an automotive company, using the supply chain as a lending mechanism. GMT described BYD as appearing addicted to supply chain financing. Chinese regulators responded in early 2025 with new rules ordering companies to settle supplier payments within 60 days. The same firm that identified the rot inside Evergrande is now pointing at the same structural pattern, in a different sector, with a much bigger company, and the world's financial press has barely noticed. Walk into a used car dealership in China today, and you might find something that does not make sense. Rows of electric vehicles with seat plastic still intact, that specific smell only brand new interiors have. 0 kilometers on the odometer, listed as used. Chinese regulators summoned BYD and several other major automakers to an inquiry after investigations confirmed that manufacturers were registering new vehicles as sold to dealers on paper, collecting government subsidies tied to each unit, and then routing those cars into the used market at heavily discounted prices. Subsidies designed to encourage clean energy adoption could reach up to 30,000 yuan per vehicle. Instead of reaching genuine buyers, the scheme allowed manufacturers to pocket the credit, then offload inventory they had effectively sold to themselves. Drone footage from sites near Hangzhou and Wuhan showed vast open-air lots filled with thousands of untouched vehicles sitting idle in the open air. Competitors saw it before regulators did. The CEO of Great Wall Motor, Wei Jianjun, gave an interview where he explicitly referenced the Evergrande of the auto industry, without naming BYD directly. Everyone who heard it understood which company he was describing. BYD's own dealer network showed average inventory levels of 3.21 months per dealer, more than double the industry benchmark of 1.38 months. At least one large BYD dealer had collapsed entirely, with 20 or more of its stores found closed or abandoned. The sales figures said one thing, the empty showroom said everything else. On December 19, 2024, Brazilian labour inspectors raided a construction site in Camaçari in the northeastern state of Bahia. The site was being built for BYD's first automobile factory in Brazil, a project celebrated by the Brazilian government as a symbol of economic cooperation. authorities identified 471 Chinese workers who had entered Brazil illegally. Of those, 163 were formally rescued from conditions investigators classified as analogous to slavery. Workers were sleeping in rooms without mattresses. In one dormitory, 31 people shared a single bathroom, forcing workers to queue at 4 a.m. to prepare for shifts beginning at 5:30. The workers' passports had been confiscated, and 60% of their wages were being withheld and sent back to China. Those who tried to leave were told they would owe the company for their flights from China and would not receive a return ticket home. A labour contract reviewed by Reuters contained clauses violating labour laws in both Brazil and China, including provisions for unilateral contract extensions and fines for conduct as minor as swearing on site. BYD blamed a subcontractor. Brazilian investigators concluded that BYD bore direct responsibility for the illegal entry of the workers into Brazil, finding that in practice the workers were directly subordinate to the automaker despite the service contracts presented. In 2025, Brazil added BYD to its official registry of employers who have subjected workers to conditions analogous to slavery. This is the human cost of the cheapest cars on Earth, and the people buying those cars in showrooms around the world, they are about to discover that the product itself carries its own set of risks. By November 2025, BYD had recalled more than 210,000 vehicles in a single year. In September 2024, the company recalled 96,714 Dolphin and Yuan Plus electric vehicles due to a manufacturing fault in their steering column control units that posed a direct fire risk. In January 2025, a further 6,843 Fangcheng Bao plug-in hybrid SUVs were recalled, again citing fire hazards. In October, BYD recalled a further 115,000 vehicles in what it described as its largest recall to date. Weeks later came an additional 89,000 Xin Plus hybrids for battery pack inconsistencies severe enough that some vehicles could not operate in electric mode at all. The pattern matters as much as the numbers. Almost every recall involved the battery or electrical system, the exact technology BYD has spent 20 years telling the world it has mastered. The 2025 Xin Plus recall was initiated by Chinese regulators themselves, meaning the defect was discovered by the government rather than self-reported by BYD. The company's competitive identity rests entirely on the claim that its blade battery technology is the safest in the industry. Safety failures originating in the battery system are not peripheral problems. They are the central promise of the company falling apart from the inside. BYD reported its second consecutive quarter of profit decline in late 2025, with net income falling 33% year over year. Revenue fell for the first time in 5 years. The miracle was beginning to show its seams, and in Beijing, the people who had built that miracle were beginning to ask a question they had spent years avoiding. In 2021, the world watched China's largest property developer, Evergrande, collapse under $300 billion of hidden debt. The warning signs had been visible for years: inflated sales figures, off-balance sheet financing structures, a business model requiring perpetual growth, held together by a government that appeared unwilling to let the structure fail until the moment it was no longer able to hold it. Then Beijing blinked, the support stopped, and one of the largest corporate collapses in history played out in public. The structural parallels to what is happening across China's electric vehicle sector today are not subtle. They are the same playbook running in a different industry. In August 2025, Chinese officials were reported to have privately urged companies, including BYD, to stop the price war before it destroyed the entire sector. President Xi Jinping himself criticized provincial governments for blindly overinvesting in EV production capacity. Industry consultancy Alex Partners predicted that of China's roughly 130 electric vehicle brands, only 15 would survive to 2030. 115 companies eliminated. BYD reported its first annual profit decline since 2021 in its 2025 annual results. Strip out government subsidies, and the real profit is half of what is reported. The wall of state capitalism can hold back many things. It has not yet found a way to hold back mathematics indefinitely. Evergrande was also called too big to fail. Its executives were also profiled as visionaries. Its sales figures were also cited as proof of an organic miracle. The CEO of Great Wall Motor was not subtle about what he believed comes next for an industry built on the same foundations. And the people who will feel it first are not in China at all. This story is not about cars. It never was. It is about a new method for using state power as a competitive weapon, one that has been refined across multiple industries and is now sophisticated enough to defeat the institutions the West built to detect exactly this kind of threat. Harvard case studies praised it. Goldman Sachs analysts priced it as a buy. Regulators missed it for years. The same playbook used in electric vehicles has already been deployed in solar panels, semiconductors, steel, and shipbuilding. The target is always the same: the industries that underpin the economic security of the country being disrupted. The European Union imposed tariffs of up to 38% on Chinese electric vehicles in late 2024. The United States raised its own tariffs to 100%. These are not the actions of countries trying to protect weak industries. They are the actions of governments that were late to understand the game being played and are now scrambling to respond. The individual cost is real, and it is personal. Pension funds hold BYD through green energy, ETFs, and index funds. Retail investors bought into the clean energy narrative without auditing the foundation it was built on. Every portfolio carrying BYD exposure today is sitting on a structure that the firm, which is called Evergrande, has publicly described as carrying hidden debt 17 times larger than the company reports. The machine is visible now. The subsidies, the phantom sales, the shadow debt, the labour conditions, the recalls, the Evergrande echo. You have seen the architecture of the illusion from the inside. The only question left is a simple one. Now that you know how the game works, are you still willing to play by their rules?